Hello, everyone. This is Pastor Brent. I just want to thank you for tuning in for this past Sunday's sermon. If you are watching on our app or through our website, or if you're listening through wherever you catch your podcasts, we're so happy that you're tuning in with us today. We just want to invite you to take a couple minutes and fill out a Connect card, or if you want to give financially and partner with our ministry, right now is your opportunity to do that through the links below or the buttons below this video. We're going to start the sermon here in a couple minutes, but I just wanted to personally say thank you for tuning in. Thank you for partnering with us. We love you guys, and we just pray that this message blesses you. We'll see you in a couple minutes.
Good morning. I'm really excited to be here today and speak with you guys. With COVID and everything, I got delayed. It's been about a year since I've been up here. But we've been on a series on discipline, and when Brent asked me to speak, he said the topic is the discipline of service. And I love serving under Brent because he's really good. He's a master delegator. Whenever he gives someone a job, he doesn't just give them a job to fill a spot. He sees the gifts and the talents in us. So when he wants us to fill a spot, it's really because he wants to see us flourish in that area. So I was super excited to do this morning. But to kind of preface this whole thing, I was not a very disciplined child growing up, to say the least. I was pretty lazy. I did whatever I could to get out of work. Every day my dad would be like, "Hey, did you feed the dog?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, I fed the dog." And he's like, "Dude, like it snowed this morning. There's no footprints out there. You were not out there." I'm like, "No." And I would just like double down. I'm like, "I did it." But I would do whatever I could to get out of work. I would disappear in the middle of like family projects of like landscaping and stuff. As we do as I say, not as I did. I see you over there. But I'd do whatever I could just to get out of work. I hated work. I didn't want to do anything. I spent most of my childhood in the basement, playing with my Legos and watching old like sci-fi channel, like 1980s like TV series, and that was like my bread and butter. I did that like day in and day out. I mean, I could sit there for hours. But going into high school, my mom came up to me and she said, "Hey, I signed you up for cross country." And I was like, "Well, what the heck is cross country?" And she's like, "It's where they run 3-mile races." I'm like, "Mom, I don't want to do that." And she's like, "Listen, you're a couch potato and you're super lazy. You're doing this." So lo and behold, she drops me off for the first day of practice. Guys, the races are 3 miles, but practices, they make you run more than 3 miles because you have to get in condition to run the 3 miles. I hated every second of it. I ended up doing it for 4 years, but just absolutely, just unequivocally did not enjoy it. Basketball was my sport. I loved basketball. I played basketball since I was a little kid. I was always doing leagues and stuff. I'm like, I love basketball. This was my passion. This is what I wanted to do. But she made me do cross country just to get in shape. So eventually I justified it. I'm like, oh, like this is conditioning for basketball. So that's how I justified it in my mind. But then on top of all these practices, if anybody ever ran cross country or track, these races are like 6 a.m. on a Saturday. So it's like a fall morning on a Saturday. You got to wake up early. It's cold. It's wet. I'm not a morning person. Then they make you wear these uniforms. Like the shorts are, I'm not joking, the shorts are like right here. There's a slit up the side, and there's built-in underwear. I'm like, this is the most bizarre thing I've ever done. I hated it. I absolutely hated it. But you had to run like a dozen races a season or whatnot. And You would get in this line, and all these other guys, they're like stretching and stuff, and I'm kind of back there just like, yeah, okay, like I'm good. And then you walk up to this line, and bang, a gun goes off, and they just expect you just to run full steam for 3 miles. And guys, I did not pay attention to the whole thing. I was not really, my mind, the gun went off, and it's like, all right, I got to get through 3 miles. Let's just go. So each race, I kind of just did whatever I felt like, whatever mood I was in, I just started running. There was no thought process behind it. Other kids on my team were like calculating their mile splits and working on pacing and stuff, and I'm just kind of out there. I realized if running through like the tree, like the wooded areas, like if I blurred my eyes, it felt like I was like on a pod racer, like the Millennium Falcon going through warp speed. I'm like, this is kind of cool. Like I was not at all paying attention. And I did okay after those 4 years. I had like a decent time of like around 20 minutes or something, but it wasn't anything spectacular. But when it came to basketball, I truly loved it. I was disciplined in it. On the practices, I'd work hard. I would just kind of mentally think through the process. I was a post guy in the middle, so I would just go over the same like post move over and over and over again and work on it. And at the end of my basketball career in high school, I was actually the captain, like one of the captains of the basketball team. I had a shooting percentage of 64%, which sounds really impressive, but I just decided I'm only going to rebound and just practice rebounds constantly. So all my shots were like 2 feet from the basket, and it's really hard to miss when you're that close. But it's basically the tale of like kind of 2 ways that I live my life in, 2 concepts of disciplines. And actually a lot of my disciplines in my adult life came from my high school years through working and through sports. So when Brent asked me to do this message, I immediately had a passage picked out, and then I went to go do it, and I'm like, oh, I did this passage last year on my last message. So I went 4 verses down in that chapter. So I've been obsessed with 1 Corinthians chapter 9 for about 2 years now, I realize. I've been just going over that chapter over and over and over again. In this series, it's called Discipline, but for me, it's called Obsession because I have a very obsessive personality. So when I latch onto something, I just kind of fixate on it, and I can't really move past it. So I moved down to 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 24, and that says, Paul says, do you not realize that in a race, everybody runs? I didn't run the whole time. But only one person gets the prize. I never got that prize. So run to win. I never really cared about winning. I just wanted to get it done. All athletes are disciplined in their training. They do it to win a prize that will fade away, but we do it for an eternal prize. So I run with purpose in every step. I do not just shadow box. I discipline my body like an athlete, training it to do what it should. Otherwise, I fear, after preaching to others, I myself might be disqualified. And guys, that's a really, like I said, I've been obsessed with that chapter. The verses just above it is what I preached last year, and I love those verses too. But it's just, I've been kind of dissecting the chapter and going through the chapter for a few years now because there's just so much good content in there. But really, it's a reflection of our own lives in the way that I ran, because I love when people, and we've all been there, when we first got saved, or when we first renewed our relationship with God, or that moment where we just kind of re-energize ourselves, and we're super excited, we're super pumped. My mom's friend Cheryl, she's kind of in that stage where she just kind of dedicated her life, and she's back here, and it's amazing because I hear the stories day in and day out. She's just inviting people. She runs out of every service. It's just like her mind's blown, like new revelation. She's excited, she's pumped, and she's out there day in and day out just inviting, because she's just so on fire and so excited. But then what happens a lot of times is after that season, the emotion starts to fade. And we start just kind of getting some apathy towards it, and we start going through the motions. Just like I was in cross country, that gun would go off, and it's just like, well, I got to get through the next 3 miles. And that happens a lot in our own lives because 9 o'clock service starts, and it's like, well, I got 2 services to perform for. I got to get up there on the stage and do that, or I got to go help in children's ministry. Let's just get through it, all right? And then afterwards, we can go get some food, and we can enjoy the rest of our weekend. I just got to get through it. But it's so easy to get in that routine of just going through the motions for the sake of just getting it done. And a story that I really like is the story of Samson in Judges chapters 13 through 16. It's a great story. It's really relevant, I think, to our lives. But a lot of times we only teach that story to children. It's got a very Herculean type Greek mythology feel of this child that was born with supernatural strength and just chosen by God to defeat the enemies. So we can really easily use it as a disclaimer for kids, this is what happens when you don't obey. But as adults, we just look at it as that kind of feels like a fairy tale. That kind of just feels far off. But really, this whole story is based in practicality. There's not much supernatural or mythology about it. It's a man's real life and his struggle with his calling that God placed in him. So to give you the backdrop, at this time, the Israelites were a theocracy. They were ruled directly by God. They did not have any governing authority. God told them what to do, and that's what they did. And if you look at the life of the Israelites, their lives were very much like this. They would be obeying God, then they wouldn't obey God. So what would happen is when they were disobeying God, God was like, okay, I got to get you guys back in line. So he would send an enemy or a group of people that would conquer the Israelites. So in this case, they've been conquered by the Israelites for 40 years because they had disobeyed God. And then in their captivity, all of a sudden they repent, and they're like, God, my life's horrible, please help me. And they start coming back, and they start reforming, and they start getting back on track. And then after a while, God will say, okay, you guys have learned your lessons. It's time for you guys to be your own free people again. And then he would bring a judge in. Now, it wasn't good to be a prophet or judge because half the time the Israelites were like, I don't want to be told what to do, and they would kill him most of the time. The Israelites were not really good. Eventually, after this, he was one of the last judges. So eventually, the Israelites are like, we're done. Give us a king. We want to look like our neighbors. Give us a king, which led to a whole other couple hundred years of problems for them. But we're in this situation where the Israelites are currently held captive by the Philistines. And God says, okay, it's time to redeem my people. It's time to free my people. So he went to a couple that was barren. And he says, listen, you're going to have a child. And I want you to raise this child under the Nazirite vow. Now, the Nazirite vow was something that was common in that time. What it was a vow that men would take to separate themselves, and they would have certain rules to follow to signify that they had separated their lives and set it aside for God's service. It was something that most people willingly stepped into and chose to do, and it came with a couple of rules. The main ones were you don't drink alcohol, you don't come in contact with any unclean things, like unclean food, dead bodies. They would remove themselves from eating certain foods that God considered unclean, but then they would also stay away from dead bodies, dead animals, even the funerals. And then the last thing is they would never cut their hair. So to signify an outward expression of their devotion to God, they would just let their hair grow. Just interesting historical side note, this is why when during the Renaissance era when the monks and the artists began painting pictures of Jesus for the church, he has long hair, even though at the time the style was short, because they connected the Nazirite vow with Jesus of Nazareth. So they said, okay, he was a Nazirite, so we're going to take some artistic liberties and we'll give him long hair and assume he took that vow. There's no evidence one way or another, but that's just kind of why the image of Jesus, that's where it came from. So Samson was born into this vow. He did not get to choose it. God put him on this earth for a specific purpose and said, you're going to be raised under this vow and you're going to adhere to this vow for the rest of your life. And things seemed to start out pretty good for Samson. He didn't seem to have much problem. Nothing's much to said about his childhood. But eventually he becomes an adult and he falls in love with a woman that lives in the city. And she's a Philistine. She's part of the group that God has called him to free the Israelites from. So he's at this point, he's walking from home into the city to see his wife. He's going to bring this woman back to be married at his house where his parents are. As he's walking, a lion comes up. And the lion comes to attack him. And the Bible says that the Spirit of the Lord came on Samson, and he killed the lion with his bare hands. And they said that he killed them with the ease that you would kill a baby goat. So he had a lot of strength. He was able to take down this lion. So he goes into town, in the city. He spends some time there. But then on his way back, it says that he saw the lion that he had slain. And it was rotting. It was deteriorating. And there was a beehive that formed inside that lion. So clearly he was in the city for a while. But on the way back, he saw this honey. And he said, you know what, I want some of that honey. And I always thought this was the most obscure thing to put in the Bible as a kid. Why does it matter if he went, first of all, it's super weird. He goes into this lion and pulls out some honey from it, some bees, and then he takes it home and he eats it and gives it to his family. But the significance of it is he broke part of his vow. He was not supposed to come in contact with any unclean things. He was not supposed to come in contact with a dead body. But in my mind, I think Samson, I don't think he did it for any malicious. It never shows at any point that Samson rebelled against God, that he didn't want the calling, that he was pushing God away. But I think he looked at that lion and said, hey, guys, I killed that lion with my bare hands. You guys see that? It was like a trophy, like from high school that you got, hey, guys, I got this trophy. But he saw it, and he's like, well, I killed that thing. That's pretty cool, right? Let's eat this honey. So he takes the honey, takes it back, and shares it with his family. So right there is a step where he systematically just broke part of his vow. Like I said, he didn't do it maliciously, but it was almost out of a sense of pride or arrogance of look what he had accomplished. And then he moves one step further. He ends up marrying the Philistine woman, and then what happened was he was basically defeating the Philistines. They could not stop him. He was going into battle, winning every time. The Philistines had no way to defeat him in that sense. So what they did is they went to his wife, who was also a Philistine, and said, hey, this guy is warring against your people. Help us. So she goes and she actually gets him drunk, which then breaks the second part of his vow. And then we know the next part of the story. She cuts his hair. So after that, Samson has completely broken his vows. We know the story. The Philistines come in, they capture him, and they enslave him. Now, growing up, my mom was actually really strict about the media that we watched in our house. I wasn't allowed to watch much of everything. Most of my childhood was spent watching, listening to the Adventures in Odyssey cassette tapes, or the feature films for family stuff that came in the mail. This was the Christianese, movies that would come on VHS and we'd watch them. I actually just found out that she still buys them for my children to watch. But she was very strict on the media we watched. We would not watch a lot of stuff. But I knew that on Sundays, we only had 3 channels, but ABC would air a movie, and generally it was a movie that there was no way I would ever be able to watch because there was just too much adult content in it and stuff. But because it was on TV, they had to edit it for TV. So they took out all the swearing, all the adult content, all the violence and stuff. So I would plan for weeks in advance. There would be commercials for it. I would see it in the newspaper, and I would plan. And what they would do is they would take a movie. First of all, they would cut out all the violent stuff. And then somehow, even though they chopped out half the movie, they would expand it for 4 hours with a whole bunch of commercial breaks in it. So you would have 2 hours on Sunday and then 2 hours on Monday. They made it a double feature. So you watched a movie over 4 hours, which over half of it was commercials. And actually, this is the story. This is how I watched the movie Braveheart for the first time, because I knew the movie Braveheart was coming. I'm like, I got to watch this movie. But I knew it was rated R. My mom would never let me watch it. So I went to my dad, and I said, Dad, this movie's going to be on. It's going to have all the content out. We're going to be good. So we watched that movie. We watched the movie over the course of the 2 nights with all the commercial breaks and stuff in it. And then for some reason, in our infinite wisdom, we're like, you know what we should do? We should rent this movie and watch it with my mom and sister. Guys, I never wanted a movie to be over so fast in my life. That movie was just, my mom just glared at us the whole time. It's God, just please let this movie end. I just want it over. But that's how I watched a lot of my media growing up. But at one point, my sister and I were being homeschooled. My mom had just got done teaching us a segment on World War II in our world history class. And coincidentally, they were going to air Schindler's List on through that same mode on ABC. So my mom's like, well, this is a good opportunity. They're going to kind of edit it that's safe for you guys to watch. We're going to watch this. And I don't really remember a lot of Schindler's List. It was a black and white movie. I was just kind of like, oh, this is worse than those other movies she makes me watch. And I just really didn't pay attention to it. But I remember a scene, and it was at the very end. And if you guys don't know the story of Oskar Schindler, basically he was a wealthy business owner. He was a German. He was part of the Nazi Party. And what he did is he actually saw the travesties that his people were committing, and he decided he was going to do something about it. So what he started doing is he started buying work vouchers for Jews out of the concentration camps. He would basically buy these vouchers, or he would bribe officials, and he would get Jews to come work at his factories. And then he would bribe officials to get them out of Germany, out of occupied territory, into the unoccupied areas where they were free. Through his life, he's actually accredited with rescuing over 1,200 Jews from the concentration camps. And I'll never forget the end of the story, the end of the movie. The war's over, and everybody's celebrating, everybody's exciting. They're congratulating him. And he has this moment where he just breaks down, and he begins crying because he says, I didn't do enough. There was more that I could have done. I didn't have enough time. I didn't lay it all on the table. He takes off his watch and holds up his watch. He says, that watch, if I would have sold it, could have bought 3 more people. He points to his car. He says, that car over there, if I would have sold it, I could have saved 10 more people. And honestly, guys, I've never seen that movie since. I was probably 10 when I watched it over 20 years ago. But that scene has really just kind of molded my adult life. In my businesses that I do, in the ministry that I have, one of my greatest fears is that after all of this, after I've done everything, after we've launched a church and I've built the businesses to support the ministry, that when my time is done, my biggest fear is that I've left something on the table, that there were still assets that belonged to me, that there were still gifts inside of me, talents that I could have given to the kingdom that could have saved more, but I didn't do it. And guys, that's one of my greatest fears. It is something that we can so easily do because it's really easy to start going through those routines, to just kind of start building our own lives like Samson did. He's building his own life, and he forgets the purpose of why he's doing these things. They just become routine. They just become second nature to him. He just wakes up every morning. We walk into church. We come and we sing 4 songs. We hear a message, and we go throughout our day. It's something like it's like a calling that we could just flip on, come into church, and then we flip off to go through our lives. But that's not what God has done. Just like Samson, we were put here for a purpose. We were, from birth, raised for a distinct purpose. And the late Chadwick Boseman, the actor that died this past week, I was watching some of his speeches that he gave, and he gave a commencement address for a college, and he put a phrase in there that really just kind of shook me and I grasped onto this week, and it was, purpose transcends disciplines. And guys, it's the concept that my purpose and what I have and the calling that God has put on my life, it transcends whatever I'm doing. So if I'm sitting here at church, it's very easy. I'm living in my purpose. But when I go out and I'm working my job, I'm building my business, that's still part of my purpose. That's still part of me building assets for the kingdom. When I'm going out to eat and hanging out with somebody, when I'm having a conversation with somebody, I decided a few years ago, I love video games. I play video games a lot in my off season when I get to kind of relax a little bit more. But I decided a few years ago that it was not a good use of my time to play video games by myself. I didn't cut them out, but I said it's a waste of time. So I stopped buying single-player games. I stopped playing games that I just dedicated time to playing it. So instead I decided I'm only going to play games with people, with my friends, with my family. So I play with my kids. I play with some of my friends here. And it's an opportunity to build and to learn and to teach and to develop relationships. Because, guys, we don't have time. We don't have time to waste. And it's so easy just to get complacent and just let that stuff go and let that stuff slide. But one of the things that I love about the story of Samson is the ending. Because the ending of the story, I think, is one of the greatest parts. So he's captured by the Philistines. He's enslaved. They actually gouge his eyes out, and they make him work for years in a mill where he just mills grain all day, just pushes that big stone in a circle. That's his job. And what happened is the Philistines thought he was defeated. They actually just kind of forgot about him. They were not threatened by him. They didn't care who he was anymore. So at one of these points, he's being transferred to a different place, and the Philistines stop at a temple where they worship one of their gods. And Samson, it may be coincidence, it may be deliberate, but he just said, hey, can I rest against that support beam over there, that pillar? Let me just relax for a second. And they didn't think anything of it because he was a defeated, broken man. He said, go ahead, go do it. But guys, this is the part that I love about the story, because Samson's sitting there, and even though he had broken his vows, his hair was cut. His hair was nothing magical. There was no power about it. It's not like he had to wait for it to grow back to get his power. That was just a symbol. God didn't put like a fail-safe, like Achilles' heel, like, oh, if he gets shot in the heel, he dies. That's his only weakness. There wasn't a fail-safe on Samson that says, cut the hair and the man's defeated. Because you see, when God creates somebody, when he implants a vision, a calling, those gifts and talents in your life, he doesn't take them away because you were disobedient. He doesn't take them away because you weren't paying attention. He puts them in you and they stay with you. But a lot of times, because of our failures, because of our mistakes, the guilt piles up on us. The regret piles up on us. So we can no longer act in those gifts because we've taken ourselves out. But in that moment, Samson, in his entire life, he stops and he says, you know what? I've messed up. He says, God, I'm sorry. Come back. And he said in that moment, the Spirit of the Lord came back onto him. He used his strength. It was restored to him. His purpose, his calling was immediately brought back. He pulled those beams with his own strength. He collapsed those beams, completely demolishing the temple to a false god and killing hundreds of Philistines in the process. And guys, I think this is something that we have to struggle with on a daily basis, because we can all think of times in our lives where we've lost sight of things, where we've wasted time, where we've wasted opportunities. But God's saying, I've not left you. He's saying, just come back. You don't have to earn your way back up to where you were. He says, I will catch you up and bring you right up to where you need to be. That if you just get over your guilt, ask for forgiveness, he's like, I forgot it all. And he says, I'm going to bring you back so that we can just push forward with the vision that I've called you to do in the first place. And I think there's a lot of us that sit in here day in and day out and think, I'm not worthy to do this anymore. That God called me and I had a great calling on my life and I knew it. I knew what I was supposed to do. But then I messed up and now I'm no good. It's over. And God's saying no. He's saying it's not over. Just come back. Get over what you've done. Forget about what you've done that's in the past. I've already paid for that. But come back. Bring your assets back to the table. Bring your gifts. Bring your talents. Bring everything you have. And let's just go. Everyone here today is here because of a general vision of this ministry. The vision that Brent gave us is you belong. That means whoever walks through that door at any given moment needs to feel comfortable, needs to feel accepted, needs to feel the love of Christ coming through us. Guys, that's not something that can be done with just a few people. If you've hung out with like me or Brent for any period of time, you're going to know that we're not everybody's cup of tea. We need many people with many gifts, with many experiences, with many backgrounds, with many abilities, so that when somebody walks in, they feel at home. They feel loved. They feel a transformation in their life that they don't even understand is going on yet. And then we need to be in here, and we need to be so excited that we've done this, that we've hung out, that we've worshiped together, that we go bursting out of those doors, just like Cheryl's doing, and just inviting person after person after person after person, because we can't contain it in ourselves. Because the love of Christ is so great in us that we can't hold it back, that we're single-minded, that it becomes an obsession. Guys, it's an obsession for me. My family tells me to slow down. They say I'm doing too much. But guys, I'll put in a full day's worth of work and I'll go to bed at night. My body's exhausted. But I can't turn off my brain. I can't stop my heart. I don't sleep. I can't wait. I got to get over the night thing so my body's refreshed so I can go do it the next day. And though my body fails me, I discipline it every day to keep going, because my heart can't stop. There's people in this ministry that have a calling greater than mine. And I feel it's my duty, it's my responsibility to do everything I can to pull them up. Young men and young women that are on fire for God, and we've got to pull them up. And I'm doing everything in my power, every strength that's in me, because I don't want to come to the end and realize I didn't do it all. I want to be completely void of all energy. I want to be completely void of all assets, all talents, all spent. I'll never get to go back and race that final race for cross country with the discipline that I understand now. I'll never know what I could have achieved after those 4 years of effort because I didn't put the discipline in. And for me, that is the most horrific idea. It's one of my biggest regrets. I can't go back. But it molded who I am today and what I want to accomplish now. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, God, I pray that I could give enough, that I could give more, that I could give everything I have. God, I pray that people in here would just be re-energized and renewed and excited about what you've done in their lives, that they would be able to get over what they've done, all the regrets, all the guilt, all the mistakes, that it would just be erased from their minds like it's been erased from yours, that they will be brought current today, back into the seat that you put them in, for the purpose that you've placed in their lives. God, I pray that we would run a race with discipline, that we would not get complacent, that day in and day out, that we would strive with everything that's in us towards that finish line. God, that we would drag as many people along with us as we can and push towards that final goal. God, I pray that this would be a church that doesn't just sit here and digest the word, but we build on it, that we grow from it, that it's a church that expands out to their communities, to their families, to their loved ones that are hurting, that are dying. God, let this be a place of excitement. Let this be a place of hope. Let this be a place that when somebody walks in, the love of Christ is so great they have no choice but to be transformed. God, I praise you and I love you. I thank you for what you've done in our lives. I thank you that you're a God that will bring us back, that we don't have to earn back your love, that we don't have to earn back our seat at the table, that all we got to do is step up and you say, here it all is. It's just been waiting for you. God, I pray that you just renew our minds and renew our hearts. In your name I pray. Amen. Church, let's stand up and worship.